So you've learned all about salves and balms, and so now we're going to put all that stuff that we just talked about into practice and make ourselves a salve and a balm. We're going to start with the salve, and we're going to do just a few basic ingredients, keep it really simple. So with a salve, your ratio is 1 part beeswax to 8 parts of your oil. And so that means it's going to make a looser product. Salves are for putting all over the body. You want them to be able to cover a larger surface, potentially use them for massage if you're going to add things like camphor or something that's going to be great for inflammation and pain. Just wanted to show you a few of our ingredients. Well, all of our ingredients, which happens to be a few. So here's our beeswax. 2 different varieties of beeswax here. This is the beeswax we're going to be using because this is beeswax that's been made into pellets. It's a lot easier to use because these little pellets are already separated, so when you add them to the oil and heat them up, they melt much faster. So if speed's your thing, this is the way to go. I like to use the pellets personally because I worry sometimes with using larger quantities of wax that I'm going to overheat my oils, which is also something you don't want to do. So the pellets help to keep a shorter heat time for the wax to melt in the oils. But this I wanted to show you is the other option. You can buy blocks of beeswax. This is beeswax that actually was made by my bees in my backyard, and I filtered it out. So that is pretty fun. How much does it weigh? Let's find out what one of these little hexagon weighs. Hexagons weigh 20 grams exactly. How sweet is that? Well, we don't need 20 grams of beeswax for this formula, so that's exactly why we're not going to use that. But if you did want to use a block of beeswax, totally great. Sometimes they have more strong smell and more aromatic constituents to them because they haven't been broken down into a smaller form, hence they haven't had a chance to oxidize as much. So when you want to use a block of beeswax, you're going to need a cheese grater or some sort of way to make this into smaller units. So that's our beeswax portion, and then we're going to be using 100% infused oils for our salve. And for our oil phase. You could potentially use a carrier oil for your salve, which would not be infused with oils, but as I've already discussed, let's turn that down, it's getting hot. So as I've already discussed, you've compounded your medicine here, and salves are medicinal. Salves are used for first aid. They're used on the skin. You could, of course, consider using a carrier oil that isn't infused for your salve. Just keep in mind that will keep your costs down. But with salves particularly, I really like using 100% infused oils because they're so medicinal and therapeutic for the skin. Whereas a carrier oil doesn't have all those added constituents of the herbs. It can help to keep costs down, but it doesn't, again, it's not as healing. So the 3 different oils that we're going to be using today are all wonderful for skin. These 2 are vulneraries. We got our comfrey leaf, and that one is a great vulnerary that's also good for things like sprains and strains and tears on the muscles. It's called bone knit is one of its other names. It's specifically used for topical use. It's not so much taken internally anymore because it's high in some alkaloids that are a little bit damaging to the liver, but it's totally safe to use topically and really great for re-knitting bones, using on sprains and strains, and also for healing wounds. Although just keep in mind with comfrey oil and comfrey leaf in any form, whether it's a poultice or however you're planning on using it, you don't want to put it on a deep puncture wound. Deep puncture wounds sometimes can still have a little bit of dirt or bacteria deep in the wound that has to be rinsed out before the wound can heal. But comfrey is so good at knitting up skin and healing wounds quickly that you can sometimes lock that bacteria inside the wound deeper in and have the surface heal up, and then you'll end up with more of a staph infection or something that you don't want to have happen. So wait on the comfrey leaf until you are sure that your puncture wound has kind of cleaned itself out and healed enough so that it's just a superficial wound. And then comfrey is great to help kind of final stretch, heal a wound wonderfully, and it is a good scar modulator, so it's going to help to keep scarring down. So it's a really good one to put even on old scars to help break up scar tissue. Another oil infusion that we'll be using is calendula flower. I infused it in safflower oil in this particular blend because safflower is a very light oil, so you can really just see the beautiful orange come through. Calendula is high in carotenoids. That orange color indicates that it's a great antimicrobial and antioxidant and good for inflammation. So also calendula flower is very high in resins, and that's going to help the wound heal quickly as well. The word is vulnerary. Vulnerary is a herbal action, which means that it's a wound healer. So comfrey and calendula are both excellent vulnerary herbs. And then I'm also going to be using an echinacea root infused oil. So that's what's in this one. Echinacea root is high, echinacea root leaf and flower all contain these really great stimulating, tingly alchemides. And that's why I'm using it in this salve, because those alchemides, that tingly sensation, indicates that it's a great antimicrobial. Antimicrobial indicates that it's kind of a full spectrum bug killer. It's going to work on fungus and bacteria and viruses. So that's what antimicrobial means. It's an overarching term for all three of those. And so echinacea I love adding to my salves that are going to be used for wound healing, because it's just such a great one for keeping the wound safe from developing any sort of infection, keeping out anything that, keeping out any bad bacteria, funguses from your wound. So keeping it clean and keeping it healthy. So that's the three oil combination that we'll be using. We're going to just do equal parts, and we are doing a 1:8 ratio, and we are filling 4 1-ounce salve jars. So we want a total of 4 ounces of salve. So I am going to be doing 13 grams of beeswax to 104 milliliters of the 3 of these. So let's start by measuring out our 3 infused oils. If I need 104 milliliters total, I need about 34 milliliters of each. So I'm going to use I'm going to find a smaller beaker. Be right back. Voila, tiny little beaker. Here we go. So about 34 milliliters of each. Start with the echinacea root, going for 104 milliliters total. .34 milliliters of calendula flower. I'm getting drippies on the table. Yummy. You can just see how all those constituents are combining to make a really great healing oil. And finally, 34 milliliters of comfrey leaf. And we actually made calendula and comfrey leaf infused oils in a previous class on infused oils. So if you're curious about how to make any of those, definitely check that out. And good thing we made them, because now we need to refill our stock bottles. Okay, so combining those 3 oils here. Checking that my milliliter total is around 104. Looks good. When you're making anything with oils, the one unsustainable part of it is that you end up using a lot of paper towels, because you don't really want your oils going down the drain. They can clog the drain. So I always wipe everything up with paper towels before I wash things in the sink. Okay, so over here, other really important tool is our double boiler. I use a double boiler because I don't like to use direct heat necessarily when I'm making my salves and balms. This way, my porcelain top, this is a all-clad. Yeah, all-clad, really great porcelain. I heard from one of my teachers a long time ago that oil reacts with metal, and so it's better to not use direct metal on oils that you're using for skincare. So I got myself a porcelain double boiler, and I love it. It's very heavy though, and you have to just be very careful when you use it so that you don't break it. Okay, so I'm going to be pouring my oil infusion compound. That's a word that indicates that there's multiple infused oils combined together. I'm adding that to there. I'm going to get the heat going on so that on high so that I can get a nice boil going. and let those oils warm up. Meanwhile, I'm going to come over here and measure out my beeswax. So that's the first part of the ratio. It's a 1:8, so we're doing 13 grams of beeswax since we did 104 milliliters of our infused oil. And we're there. Oh, a little over. There we go. All right, well, I am not even going to hesitate. I'm going to pour this in with my oils and let everything start melting together. So it's really important to keep an eye on your salve as it's melting. I like to definitely kind of hover and stir frequently because your oils can get too hot, and then you create a frying oil, which is no fun to play around with. You want this to go just to the point where the wax melts. We'll throw the wax melting point up right here because that's cool information to know, and I do not know the number. So yeah, we're gonna let that melt and prepare our space over here for pouring. Some of it's starting to kind of meld together. All right, our salve is fully melted. Our beeswax has disappeared and become one with our oils. And it's this beautiful green color. Looks very healing and wonderful. And the thing about it, there's one final trick that I want to teach you here, because first of all, it's very hard to pour directly from this into these tiny little jars. So you're going to want to have a pouring vessel that you use. But because of the amount of beeswax which is in this salve, the moment I pour it into here, which is a cold container, it's going to seize on the sides, and you're going to end up with all this hard salve coating the sides of your jar. So to avoid that, you plop your jar in the hot water that you just created using your double boiler and let that warm up for a moment. So it's just sitting in a hot water bath, basically. You don't want water to spill over the top and into the pouring vessel, because then you've combined water and oil and you'd have to kind of start all over. So take care when you're putting it in there. Make sure it's just enough water so that it's not going to float, but it's just going to sit in there nicely. Okay, and that's probably good. So I'm going to take it out of there now. This way the jar, this way this is hot, so when I pour my salve in, it's not going to seize. You still want to kind of race against the clock here, because the cooler it gets, the harder it will be to pour, and the more of it will harden on the sides of your vessel. But now that the entire batch is in there, you can always plop it back into your hot water for a little bit longer. That's a little bit hot, so I'm gonna hold it with a towel. Dang, pretty good measurements. Okay, at this point you just let them sit and cool, and the less you disturb the surface and shake them, the better, because at this point you want to cool them till they're hardened. And sometimes they end up with a concave funnel in the middle, so some folks will come back around with what little left that they have left, or they'll save a little extra on the side to pour off the tops so that they all look nice and uniform. We'll see how they look when they are solid. We'll come back in a moment for that. Okay, we're back with our salves. They turned out beautifully. At this point, they're solid. It's only been about 15 minutes. So we've got 4 ounces here, 1 ounce each in these jars. At this point, you put the lid on them. Make sure to label them with all of the different fun ingredients that you've included. I chose not to add essential oils to this healing salve. We're going to be using some essential oils in our lip balm, but for topical salves, it's really up to you. The essential oils, of course, are wonderfully therapeutic and have great use in salves, but This way you can also use this salve on animals. Essential oils and animals do not mix. So this is a more utilitarian salve that's safe for children, animals, and you. And so one thing to remember with anything that comes in a jar that you're going to be sticking your finger into is that every time you stick your finger in it, you will be adding bacteria from your hands into the jar. Salves are pretty good with shelf life because the beeswax and the oils are all mildly antimicrobial. But just remember that, like everything else, your salve does have a shelf life. I would use it up in 6 months to a year. Also keep it in a cool, dark place if you can. And remember that this is great for topical wounds, bruises, sprains, strains, and it's a little bit warming, so I wouldn't necessarily use it on burns, at least not at first. Calendula particularly is a very warming herb, so I would make more of a lavender infused oil salve if I wanted to use it on burns. But definitely a great one to keep in your first aid kit and keep on hand after you've rinsed a wound out really, really well. And once you've confirmed that it's not a puncture wound, because there's comfrey infused oil in this, then this is going to be a great salve to use topically for all of your topical wounds under your band-aids or when you're just letting them heal in the open air. Okay, so that's it for salves. Now in the next section we'll move on to balms.